Stealing Hume's thunder. Recently, Robert Shaver has suggested that Hume, in attacking monkish virtues, targeted only useless austerities and rigors, suffering and denial, and his interest is restricted to such cases. Hume need not object if there are alleged to be cases in which the austerities and rigors are useful. But we should be careful here. There is a danger of begging the question or else of stealing Hume's thunder. Hume's thunder lies in the insistence that the monkish qualities are vices, which is to say, their possession makes a person morally worse than he would otherwise be. Vices are harmful and disagreeable qualities. It is worth noting that we do not think vices are morally neutral or permissible in cases where they happen to prove harmless or even useful. For example, a dishonest man's reputation precedes him and renders his cheating ineffective, or a violent maniac is put to good use in time of war. Such cases do not affect what we want to say about dishonesty or the propensity for violence. Of course, every virtue and every vice is to some extent vulnerable to the vagaries of context and circumstances. Thus, wit is a wonderful quality, but it is not everywhere appropriate to be witty. Even the brightest joke about bombs is unwelcome in an airport terminal. Or take cheerfulness, which generally carries great merit, for it communicates itself to all around and brightens their spirits. Yet even cheerfulness can be immoderate or offensive in some circumstances. One's friend had just stepped into a landmine. Clearly, such possibilities do not diminish the value of wit or cheerfulness. By the same token, if the monkish qualities were indeed vices, an occasional benefit derived from being monkish would not increase their value a whit. Of course, the root question is whether the monkish qualities are vices. If they are, we do not want to lower ourselves to a close examination of their potential usefulness in some cases. Compare how we would feel if the sensible knave were to ask us to explain what is wrong with cheating in cases where it would not be detected. On the other hand, if the monkish collage is viewed as good by some sane and responsible people, as useful or agreeable or both, we have reason to think that these are not vices at all. Shaver alludes to a dialogue where Hume points out how different moral practices were among the Greeks and the French, although they were seen to employ the same underlying moral principles. Plainly, Hume is prepared to acknowledge that a list of virtues, quite unlike his own, can be valid given the appropriate social and economic circumstances. So what about monks and the monkish, who undoubtedly value their own form of life as useful and agreeable? Shaver replies in Hume's behalf. But the monk, unlike the Greeks and the French, is simply wrong. His virtues serve no manner of purpose. There is a question of fact here, and it seems doubtful that Shaver or Hume has answered it aright. Section 4. Religion, Morality, and Style of Life. Let us look more closely now at the kind of case Hume must have had in view. What is the impact of religion on moral life according to Hume? Religion is commonly thought to have close connections with everyday morality, the idea being that morality is dependent on religious beliefs for its backing, both enforcement and sense. It is well known that Hume's account of morality makes no room for any necessary links with religion. Morality finds its backing for Hume in the specific processes of the human mind and body. It remains possible, however, that religion may prove to have significant contingent connections with everyday moral life. There are two kinds of possible linkage. Certain morally significant structures of human character may cause the occurrence of some religious beliefs and attitudes, and some religious beliefs and attitudes, once formed, may in turn produce practices that are morally significant. Regarding the former type of linkage between religion and morality, Hume observes in his essay, Of Superstition and Enthusiasm, that certain states of character, weakness, fear, melancholy, together with ignorance, are the true sources of superstition. Here is his explanation of how it happens. The mind of man is subject to certain unaccountable terrors and apprehensions, proceeding either from an unhappy situation of private or public affairs, from ill health, from a gloomy and melancholy disposition, or from the concurrence of all these circumstances. In such a state of mind, infinite unknown evils are dreaded from unknown agents, and where real objects of terror are wanting, the soul, active to its own prejudice and fostering its predominant inclination, finds imaginary ones, to whose power and malevolence it sets no limits. As these enemies are entirely invisible and unknown, the methods taken to appease them are equally unaccountable, and consist in ceremonies, observances, mortifications, sacrifices, presents, or in any practice which either folly or knavery recommends to a blind and terrified credulity. It should be abundantly clear to anyone who knows Hume's ethics that those states of character that cause superstition are certain to attract moral censure from humanity. Global terror of the unknown and the attendant sense of weakness are disagreeable both to the person who wallows in them and to anybody nearby. And nothing could be more useless than a fear with no real object, or a feeling of weakness hinged to such a boundless fear. Morality can only condemn such excessive and inappropriate emotional reactions. Consider now the other kind of connection, where superstition, under some circumstances, will produce vile, offensive practices. As Hume says more than once, the corruption of the best things produces the worst. Here's an illustration from the natural history of religion. Where the deity is represented as infinitely superior to mankind, this belief, though altogether just, is apt, when joined with superstitious terrors, to sink the human mind into the lowest submission and abasement, and to represent the monkish virtues of mortification, penance, humility, and passive suffering as the only qualities which are acceptable to him. The problem is, how can a human court the favor of an infinitely superior deity? The superstitious person's thought process here is not immediately obvious. Why should an infinitely superior deity be supposed to favor these qualities? In another passage, Hume addresses this question. In restoring a loan or paying a debt, his divinity is nowise beholden to him, because these acts of justice are what he was bound to perform, and what many would have performed were there no God in the universe. But if he fast a day, or give himself a sound whipping, this has a direct reference, in his opinion, to the service of God. No other motive could engage him to such austerities. By these distinguished marks of devotion, he has now acquired the divine favor, and may expect, in recompense, protection and safety in this world, and eternal happiness in the next. So the idea is that a person might seek suffering and discomfort for purely religious reasons. One's motivation in such a case will be unmistakable. The superstitious person thinks, as it could never be, at least to humans, if one were to seek joy, cheerfulness, or tranquility for purely religious reasons. The latter qualities are useful and agreeable in themselves for singularly earthly reasons. By this remarkable twist of thought, a person is brought to embrace certain practices because they are useful and painful. In this curious manner, religious beliefs lead the superstitious to welcome evils of a serious, character-damaging kind. It is worth noting, though, that the seed for this program can only get started in the soil of a bad character. It requires the ungrounded terror which prompts superstition in the first place. Let us acknowledge that Hume's analysis of the twisted religious underpinnings of the perversely self-denying or self-destructive practices of certain persons is an accurate depiction, which is to say, people of that ilk really have existed. Hume was probably acquainted with a few of them, and his exposure must have left a sour taste indeed. We can readily comprehend why Hume would look askance at such persons. But this admission does not warrant the wholesale rejection of the practices or qualities prized by those twisted persons. It might even turn out that various religiously inspired monkish qualities have a manifest utility and agreeableness. Think of the Amish. In that event, Hume's philosophy should endorse those qualities as virtues, I believe, despite their ugly origin in superstition. In Hume's defense, we might plead that he did not have the Amish for objects of comparison. Times have changed, and religion has retreated from its position of global dominance. Hume's bold pronouncements were true, or true enough in his own day and age. His observations led him to believe in no uncertain terms that religion is a virulent disease, a cancer destroying the moral fiber. It is believed, too, that Hume might have been willing to follow our thought, namely that persons who practice the wholesale collage of monkish virtues may for all of that prove to be admirable and useful members of society. Here we may think of the young David Hume driven by his ideas and by fierce ambition, or of many other philosophers. We may fairly conclude that Hume's real sticking point regarding the monkish virtues concerns their sometimes religious underpinning. Even if it should turn out, in particular instances, that various religiously inspired monkish qualities have a manifest utility, even if these virtues prove to be agreeable to some people, Hume might continue to look askance at them. If that is so, we would have to conclude that Hume's moral prejudice against religion is on display in his remarks about monkish virtues.